So here I have a 91 Honda Prelude. The problem with this is when you decelerate, you get the idle, the revs on the tacho, you can see them altering, basically hunting around a bit. They basically drop off. Should sit around 1,000 odd revs I think most of the time when they're idling, but when you suddenly back off, decelerate, slow down, pull up to an intersection, it actually drops right off. And I know from when this car did this a while ago, years ago, it would actually almost stall the car when it did it. Basically you can test it just by driving along your driveway and slamming the brakes on and see if the actual idle drops down. Just watch the tachometer, and if it's doing that, and it'll often do it in forward and reverse, it's actually the filter on the fuel pump. It's actually clogged up. So it's located in the boot, under this metal cover right at the back of the boot. There's one on the other side as well for the level sensor, but it seems to be the passenger side one is the one for the pump itself. I think that's on all models around the world. This is an Australian right-hand drive one. Later in the video I think I say that I thought it was on the driver's side, but it's not, as I found out. So you can actually get to this from the boot, and I believe you can actually pull it out from inside the boot. You're still going to have to remove this plastic bit behind the seat here by the look of it, so you can get this side cover bit out of the way. But I actually find that pretty difficult, pretty horrible to have to bend over the boot and lift this metal plate up and work through that hole. So I actually take the back seat out and the frame behind it, and then you can work from just kneel on the bottom part of the back seat. Makes it a lot easier. You should disconnect the battery before you do this, just see, because you've got to pull an electrical plug out there, and you don't want any chance of it sparking, even though I don't think it has any voltage on it, because you're going to have the open fuel tank once you take the pump out. And so those fumes, obviously you don't want to be breathing those in. You don't want them in a confined space, and you don't want any risk of setting them on fire. I did do it inside the garage, but with the boot and the doors open on the car, but it was, a very cold morning, so there was virtually no fumes at all. But you do have to be careful, because they're both toxic to breathe and explosive once they mix with oxygen. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Also, this metal cover here is a little bit sharp on it, on the edges, and the hole, once you remove that, it's just glued down. The hole there that you've got to get your hand down to pull the bits and pieces off the pump and then remove it, that's very sharp, so you've got to be very careful with that. I've still got a little bit of a cut on myself. I forgot how sharp they were, so best if you can wear some gloves while you're putting your hand through that hole, or even run a bit of tape or something around the edge of it. So now we'll go and have a look inside the actual car and pull it to bits to get it out, and we'll go from there. So I've dropped the back seat down and pulled the cloth that's in the boot back through into the interior. Now there's a clip right in the middle where there's a nut you can see there. We're going to unclip this cloth, so just pull that back out. So now from memory we have to remove this frame, which means taking these other bits. I think we might have to take the headrest off and remove the two plastic covers. Probably easiest to remove, well, we're going to have to remove, I think, the back seat. So if you just come down, this is the passenger side end, there's a little clip that just pops off, if I can get it. Not the easiest thing to get your hands around. That's it. So I have this little plastic clip here that allows the seat to slide, I think, towards the passenger side. Yeah, that's it, and now it comes. So we've got the back seat loose now, and the cover in the boot. Good chance to give that cover a clean. So we'll take the whole back seat out and put that clip, I'll put it on the front seat so it's safe. Yeah, now so I think we have to take this headrest. There's a couple of, I forget where they are, a couple of bolts here somewhere. Maybe we've got to take this plastic bit off first. I think we just remove these rubber bits, and there's a plastic clip there. That needs to be carefully prized out. There's a lot of them. There's a few of them, so there's one out. You should just pull out these plastic clips. I'll just put the camera down. Yeah. So once you remove a rubber piece by just pulling, and you can pull these clips out, and then this piece comes off, and you can now see a couple of bolts here. I hope I'm not going to have to take the side off to get that out. And there's a bolt down there, and a couple of bolts along there. Same on the other side. We'll have to remove that plastic cover, and then we can access this properly to the point that we can actually lift the pump up. So yeah, there's the mounts for the headrest are hidden under that plastic bit, but I think we can probably leave that in place. Right, now I'll remove the other cover there, and we'll go from there. If you haven't already got one of these, you should get one. It's the hexagonal to 1/2 inch socket type adapter, which you can just put in the chuck of your drill. Should have opened that up before. Like that. And then you've got a battery drill. And once you've loosened it off with the ratchet, you can just do the rest of the work with these. Makes the job much quicker. Just put your 10mm socket or whatever on there. And we can undo these bolts. Now I've hand loosened them. And just like that. Probably should put this on the slower setting, but anyway, once they're loose, you can go full speed with the drill. So much easier. Try not to lose them down the back of the seat or anything, but not hard to get out again if you do. This plastic's holding it on, so I'll just have to do that off kick. And then we have most of the bolts out. I'll just get these other two by hand, and we'll get this piece of metal out. So now we have this piece loose. Can take that out of the way. Put it in the boot for now. And we have access to our covers here. There's a bit of plastic in the way, or lining, whatever it's made out of. But that's not the end of the world. Now, I can close this up. You should be able to see our fuel pump straight down there. And I think I've got the wrong side. Okay, I've removed both these covers, and yeah, it's only I think the fuel sensor, the level sensor on the driver's side. So the fuel pump's actually on this other side here. Got some light down in there. So there's the pump. It's got the hoses attached and a couple of wires for the actual pump itself. So we need to undo, there's some bolts around the outside of that, and might have to remove one of the lines, fuel lines, comes off with a bolt there, about a 7-inch bolt we take out. The other one's got a little clamp on it, that'd be the return line probably, and there'd be some sort of plug for the electricity under that cover. So we'll have to remove those, the fuel lines, the connection, and then also undo there's a few bolts that hold it to the tank. Then we should be able to pull the whole unit up and out of the tank and see if it needs a clean. Here's a better view of the pump. Just be careful when you're taking these metal covers off. They're glued down and they are sharp on the edges. I just cut myself on one. I haven't taken the sharp edges off, but there's a lot of dust on this pump here, so I'll get a paintbrush and brush all that dust off before I touch anything else, just so we don't get any of that into the petrol tank. So we'll clean all that off, and then I'll start disconnecting things and undo. There's 1, 2, 3, 6 nuts by the look at 6 10mm nuts that have got to come off to remove it from the tank. And then it will just pull up through this hole. Yeah, I've cleaned the dust off now, got rid of what I could. Looking a bit better, and pulled the rubber boot back so you can see the connector there. The electrical connector, that's just one of these. I can really light this up and do it at the same time. But you just got to press on that little plastic bit on the right hand side there, and she comes out just like that. It's now loose. Put that out of the way somewhere, but not too far out of the way. I want to be able to find it again. So that's the plug out of the way. Now I've got to take the clip off this hose and undo the 17mm bolt on the other one, and then we can disconnect the rest. So you squeeze the tabs together on this hose here, on the little clamp on it. Just squeeze them together with some pliers, and then slide it back up the hose, and you'll feel it come off. There's a bit of a bulge in the hose there, and then the diameter drops a bit, so you know you're off the piece on the pump that goes up inside the hose. And then you might just need a bit of a screwdriver to carefully prise the hose loose. Try twisting it first, and maybe need a screwdriver, but be very careful with it until you get it loose, and then just slide that backwards off that fitting. Okay, so I've removed this 17mm nut. Just have a rag ready because there's a bit of fuel comes out of the hoses when you remove them. You can see it's still a little bit wet on there. And just be aware that this nut, there's actually a washer still on it. And then when you lift this hose, this fitting on the hose off, there's another washer that's sat on the actual pump itself. That's that one sitting over here next to the nut, so beware that they're in there. Technically they should be replaced every time you do this, but they seem to be alright to reuse them. But just beware that there are a couple of potentially loose washers. When you lift the nut, lift the bolt up, this hollow bolt, make sure you hang on to the washer that sits directly below the bolt head on it. And then as you move the hose out of the way, expect another washer to be sitting on the pump or sticking to the hose itself. So you need to get this other little one that's sitting next to the bolt there, and make sure you keep that, because that's got to go back in. That goes in on top of the pump, then the hose fitting fits on, then the bolt with its washer attached goes on top of that, and it's all bolted together. They basically seal it up. So we're now ready to take out the 6 bolts that hold the pump to the tank. Now to get the actual pump out, because it's got a sort of an angled piece inside, you actually got to rotate it around. I've now got the connector pointing over that way, and the metal hose fitting pointing towards front of the car, almost towards the driver's seat basically, so I've had to rotate it to there before it will start lifting. So now it's just a matter of should just pull right out, and again have your rag ready because there'll be petrol dripping off the end of this. But it's a bit of a fiddly one, and we've sort of got to lift it up and angle it, I think, inwards towards the boot a bit, and you should be able to get it out. There's also this other rubber piece you can see sitting below a rubber seal, so you've got to kind of pull that back up because it's got to come out with it. But yeah, we should nearly have it out now. Okay, you have to excuse the mess here, but this is the pump unit. There's the top of it. See, my hands are nice and dirty from getting that out. And that's the bag on the bottom, the inlet to the pump. Pump motor's that round thing. And it is pretty filthy. That bag should look probably more like this middle bit here. There is an absolute coating of something disgusting all over that, so we're going to have to clean all that off. There is a bit of muck in the bottom of the tank. I think it's just because I live up a dirt road, a bit of dust has been getting in there. It's possible the old hoses and stuff in this car being 30 odd years old now, it might be that they're starting to lose a bit of their lining or something that's going into the tank. Not really sure. I did clean this out, I think it was about 6-7 years ago, because it had the same problem. And I did clean out anything I could see in the bottom of the tank. I basically drained the tank and wiped everything out with a rag, but it hasn't taken all that long and not that many kilometres. I don't use it that much. And yeah, the bag's, I don't know if I can get a closer view of that, but the bag's quite disgusting. But that'll be the problem. That just reduces the fuel flow, and for some reason when you decelerate, it seems the fuel must slosh around or something, and the pump really seems to have a lot of trouble sucking it up. But yeah, we're going to have to maybe use, I'm not sure what the best thing to clean that is, probably petrol you would think, but something like carby cleaner would probably be the ideal thing, but might use some degreaser and that type of stuff. wax and tar remover or something, see how that goes, and just try and get that bag nice and clean and get all the little holes in it open again. So a bit of a scrub with an old toothbrush, and I just soaked a bit of terps on there for now. I'll dry that off after. A bit of petrol that came out of the unit as well, and then just flush it off with some terps or something, and yeah, that's cleaned it up pretty well. You can pretty much see light through it again. Ideally you probably need to remove it and clean the inside out, but I'm not quite sure how that comes off the fuel pump. I think this will do for now. I'll just give it a good scrub and then a flush as best I can to get the crap off the outside, and that should get it working again. So make sure you got that rubber seal part has to come through. If I can get some bloody light on it. There's like 3 pieces that come up through. There's this little, where is it? It's fallen down, of course. It really doesn't want to stay. There's like a little rubber piece sticking up there, a larger one in between 2 of the bolt holes, and then 2 of these other little teat things sticking up. Yeah, of course every time I let go of it, it drops off. So I've got the pump in this far, and then it's just a matter of, it's actually quite difficult to get in, but you just got to keep rotating it clockwise basically. So yeah, I should go down and just trying to hold this rubber thing in place while you do it is a real pain, because it wants to drop off and it's near impossible to get it in place. This doesn't want to go in now, of course. It did before. It's a real juggling, because you've got to get the pump, that little bag and stuff, down into a little metal piece in there, a little trough thing that it sits in. Here we go. This really is one of the most annoying things. I think if we do that and then, yeah, we'd rotate it clockwise, it's quite fiddly, but it does go eventually. And of course everything's catching on everything. I don't know who designed this stupid thing like this. They couldn't have made it more precision for being the tightest fit imaginable. It seems to be catching on something. Yeah, it's a bloody horrible job, and trying to keep this stupid rubber seal on it. Really not meant to be easy. I think maybe it's possible that hose is getting in the way. Maybe not, but it's just a matter of you trying to slide the piece into position. I did have it down there before, but of course the rubber piece fell off, so I had to take it out again, and now it really doesn't want to go back in, but I'll have a bit more of a fiddle, see if I can get it to sit back down in the tank. So the key is to get the rubber piece. We've got to get the pump partly inserted, then get the rubber piece, the rubber seal down there, because otherwise it'll catch on all the threaded bits sticking up, the studs, and get that in place. You've got to get that large nipple on it over where the connector was pointing before. That's in front of that, and then there's these other 2 little nipple things sticking up. One of them faces directly towards you. The other 2, I guess, are at, what is that, 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock, something like that, from the position you are in the back seat. So if you can get the main pump body down inside it, then drop the rubber down, then rotate the rest of it clockwise, it should all come back down. Then you've got to try and get those little nipples up through the unit, and then you can finally sit it down on the studs, and we're ready to screw it all back in now, bolt the actual pump back to the tank, and then we'll reconnect the hoses and the electrical, and hopefully everything will be running again after that. So I've got the washer sitting back on this hose connection here, and then we sit that hose bit on. Don't know if I can get enough light in there to see this. Probably not. Talk about in the worst bloody position. That might work. So put our washer on here, then the hose sits across and goes between a couple of bits that hold it in place, and of course the bolt has a washer on it already. Make sure that's in place, and it's just a matter of course the washer's going to move. Make sure you get everything in line, and then you can start threading. Thread it in by hand just to make sure. Do it hand tight. So yeah, so there's 2 washers either side of that hose fitting, and the hose fitting sits between two little bracket things here. And just make sure you got that right. I've got the other hose pushed on for now, and then I'll just get some pliers and pull that clamp back forward, and we'll plug our plug back in, and we should be ready to go. So I've got everything back in place now. Before we put anything else back together, it'd be best to give the car a run and just make sure nothing's leaking there. Once the pump's been run a bit, we'll see if there's any leaks. Even just turning the ignition on and off a couple of times should get the pump to give a quick run, just to pressurise everything. Just make sure it's not leaking at all, and I'll take this car for a bit of a drive later, and I'll check it again when I get home, just make sure there's no sign of any leaking there. And if that's the case, then I can put everything back together. Obviously just the reverse of what we did before. And of course check the car when you're suddenly decelerating it at an intersection, or just even going up the driveway, and then slam the brakes on and just make sure the revs don't go down, which is what will happen if that pump's faulty or that bag on the inlet is clogged up. So I reckon we should have fixed that, because that's what all it was last time, but not sure why it clogged up again. I thought it would last quite a few years, but hasn't been that long. But anyhow, we'll give that pump a run, just make sure there's no sign of anything getting wet around any of the connections, because you don't want a fuel leak or something could catch fire. So just make sure everything's sealed up nicely, and if that looks like it's the case, then we can put the rest of the car back together, and you should be right for a few more years until it clogs up again. Now, as I turn the key around, we'll be able to hear the pump go, especially now that I've got the cover off it, so I'll face the camera that way. So that's the pump running. If I turn off the ignition and turn it on again, we can hear the pump going. So I'll just check that now to see if it's wet at all on the connection before I even start the car. And if that's all looking good, I'll give it a quick run and make sure it's not leaking. If that's good, I'll take it for a half-hour drive, and just to check it again before I put everything back together, just to make sure there's no fuel leaks anywhere.